And before I start off, I have a little housekeeping. For all you who are already on your mobile phones or want to get on your mobile phones, there's a conference app. And within the conference app, there's a schedule button. And within the schedule button, you can pick today's date, the 30th. And from there, you can pick the EV panel. And when you go into the EV panel, scroll down, and there's a live poll where we've asked you a few questions. So for anyone who comes in late and you end up sitting next to them, you can share this little secret. But the main idea is to give us an idea of who's in the audience. So appreciate it if you guys could answer questions 1 to 3 if you have a moment. So without further ado, I want to introduce the panel. I have Sanjay Krishna next to me, co-founder and CEO of Lithium Urban Technologies. They have over 400 electric vehicles, and it's likely the largest commercial electric vehicle fleet outside of China in the world. So that's pretty exciting. And I'm most excited by his audacious goal of generating 1 billion kilometers of urban journeys in India by 2020 that are powered by renewable, clean resources. So nice to meet you. Sanjeev, he's the CEO and country head of ABB here in India. He oversees about a 1.6 billion revenue company with over 11,000 employees. And he spent the past 18 years overseas for ABB, but he came back in 2016, and he's very excited to be part of the electric vehicle future here in India. Next to him, we have Dr. Junior Wali, who I think a few of you know. He's a professor at IIT Madras and an advisor to the Indian government. He is considered a pioneer in nurturing industry-academia interactions in India, and he's actually known as a key advisor to the Indian government and its electric vehicle plans. And finally, but not last, is Naveen, and he's the MD of Hero Echo Group, which is widely recognized as shaping the electric vehicle story here in India. And he's been a big contributor to the two-wheeler developments. And I'm actually hoping, although he's told me that this isn't the case, that there'll be some test vehicles in the parking lot when you leave this session. So before we get into that, real quick, the panelists have spent a lot of time preparing for this event, and so I thought it made sense to share just some of their goals for your session. And they're hoping that after this session, you can walk away with an understanding of how stable policy and more predictable standards will accelerate electric vehicle adoption in India. They also believe you can understand how India can benefit from the global electric vehicle experience to date, and also that there are electric vehicle technologies available today that'll help accelerate the infrastructure needed for electric vehicles here in India. Our panel has 4 sections. The first is going to be a bit of an electric vehicle warm-up to give everybody some of the basics. And then we'll do a lightning round of yes-no type questions, and then deep panelist questions. And finally, we're going to open it up to you all. So we're hoping that the polling is working, and Olga will wave to me if it is. If it isn't, we'll come back to it. And I don't see anything suggesting it is. That's a thumbs up. So that means it's somewhere visible over there. I'm going to move on because I can't see the screen. There it is. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so 80% of you are here because you're curious about the electric vehicle evolution in India. So that's a very good result. So we have the right audience. Olga, could we look at the next question? This is the question of, do you think India will achieve its 2030 electric vehicle goal? So we're testing the believers in this audience. And we may be breaking the internet at the same time. Oh, well, there you go. It was a brief showing, and it looked like a very high percentage believe in it. So I think we'll leave it at that before we push the envelope on the last question. I'll go for it. Do you believe that the charging stations and swapping stations will be in place by 2030 that are needed? I have a moment of notice from Olga. how was this done in the past? There we go, 70%. Okay, good. So we have a great mix of curiosity and believers in the audience. So the quick 101 questions we're going to ask. We're going to start with Naveen. Do you think you could summarize for the audience the current incentive schemes by the government of India? Talk about FAME, or F-A-M-E, other incentives, both non-fiscal and fiscal, as well as any R&D investments that are being incentivized.
So at this point, we've got FAME going on. FAME was derived from the NEMMP policy, which was actually announced in 2013 and came into implementation in 2015 as FAME 1, which was about 700 odd crores of rupees, which was earmarked by the government for electric vehicles and to create the infrastructure. A large part of that amount has actually gone towards building the government infrastructure in testing, so ARAI, CAT, CAT, etc., testing systems for the electric vehicles. So in FAME, there are subsidies which are given for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers. And that amount ranges from 7,000 rupees to 22,000 rupees, depending on what vehicle it is. For a lead acid, it's about 7,000. For advanced lithium, it's about 22,000 for a two-wheeler. And in cars, it goes from about 15,000, goes up to 136,000 rupees, depending on what battery you're using. And similar is the case. There's somewhat subsidy which is given for electric three-wheelers as well. Besides that, there are incentives given by the government for R&D, but a large number of companies don't actually take those because the process of getting those incentives is very, very cumbersome. You've got to register yourself with the government as being a government recognized R&D body, etc. So a large number of companies don't even go down that path. So these are the main FAME policies. And there is FAME 2, which is expected over the next couple of months, which the government is working on. And prior to that was the MNRE subsidy. Now that is a national subsidy. Then there are some state subsidies which are given as well. So Delhi has one, and Gujarat has got, the GEDA has one subsidy as well, which is for the girl child. So there's two states who are supporting the India at this point of time.
Well, that's helpful. So Ashok, can you provide the audience with kind of a 101 on battery charging and battery swapping and what sort of standards the government plans on, and perhaps maybe talk a little bit about how charging companies and battery companies and OEMs can work together in addition to some of your other thoughts?
I will slightly change. First of all, I want to point out that the government is totally committed to move to full electric vehicles at the earliest possible. And hopefully it will happen before our target date. But let's understand that India has 7.1% of its GDP dependent on auto sector and about 5% on processing of fuel and distribution of transport fuel. So we have 12.1% of our GDP and something close to 27 million jobs on the organized sector for this. So we are very clear that as we transition to electric vehicle transition is going to happen whether we like it or not, and we want to accelerate it. So as it happens, we are able to preserve our GDP and the jobs and in fact grow it. That's one of the key things that we are trying to do. Most of the world today, the electric vehicles happen with subsidies ranging from 30 to 40%. Now, we did start FAME, but we do not think that we can sustain subsidy. Government just does not have in India money for large-scale subsidy as we do a large-scale transition. So essentially, we can give tax concessions. We will certainly work on tax concession, but we are not likely to give subsidy. Similarly, even the chargers and other things are going to be a business case. So everywhere we are looking at business case. We will have to innovate. We cannot just follow the path that has been done in the rest of the world. We need vehicles which are far more affordable than the rest of the world. Number two, as I told you, the subsidy is not going to be there. Number three, even most of the world has followed what is called fast charging. You go, you have a limited range, you have a certain range in your vehicle, and once you do a fast charge. But you know, fast charging at high temperature, like 40 degree, 45 degrees centigrade, can severely impact a low-cost battery. And we don't have an option of using high-cost battery because the cost will go up. So we don't think that that alone will work. So we have to use a totally different approach. And therefore, we are looking at all kinds of different things. We are looking at battery swapping, we are looking at the fast charging, and we are looking at all kinds of options how to make the whole thing viable. Finally, we are very clear that we will not be able to preserve our ecosystem if we don't make every aspect of the battery. We have to work on raw materials and chemicals. We are actually, India does not have those lithium, manganese, cobalt, but we are doing now battery recycling. We have been very successful in recycling the old batteries and recover 85% of 95% of lithium, manganese, and cobalt, and 90% of graphite. With that, we'll have to do making of cells. Cell manufacturing, we'll have to get partners from outside. We do not have the technology. And finally, the battery pack manufacturing. We are going to make that. The chargers, the final thing that I want to point out, chargers, we cannot bring chargers from Europe and China and United States. They're just too expensive, and the fast chargers, and bring them out here. They just won't have a business case. So we'll have to get chargers developed which are much lower cost. We have made a great beginning in that. We have already come up with a tender through ESL for 10,000 vehicles. We are going to make it about 100,000 in coming years. We are going to move in three-wheelers, bus segment, and two-wheeler segment. In all of them, in next 1 year, it will evolve. And it will take about 3 to 4 months before we come with a converged policy. Thank you.
Thank you. So Sanjeev, I think maybe dovetailing right off of what the doctor spoke about, I think maybe if you could explain a little bit why charging stations are a little bit more they're perceptually different here in India, and maybe talk about maybe what fast charging and AC charging versus DC current, and I don't know, act like a professor actually for a few seconds here and help people understand that question.
Well, as far as the charging stations are concerned, I think they are common. The requirement for the car charging is common around the globe. And only thing is the grids, the way they are constructed in different countries, they can be different. Like say in US, you have a single phase grid, we have 3-phase grid. And certain countries are much more kind of having a better distribution system than we have today. But I think we are augmenting all those capacities both in the transmission as well as distribution. Now, when it comes to charging stations, I think one has to keep in mind that government will provide a good policy framework. But the industry gets developed in the private hands. And the private hands, they always look for the most efficient solutions and also the business models that can be supported. So the argument in favor of the fast charging stations is that it's just like if you say today for the IC engines, you go to a petrol pump and you have a dispenser, and that dispenser has to dispense fuel into the car. And the time it takes to dispense the fuel is important. If it's a slow dispenser, you will take that much time to fuel the car. And if you have a fast dispenser, you can have that many cars passing by the station. So it is the return on investment that will really drive these behaviors going forward. So fast charger has a better rate of return, and also it is good for the person who will really own it and part of the, keep it part of the infrastructure. And of course, over a period of time, it will be different segments of technologies that will be required. You will have two-wheelers, three-wheelers, you will have four-wheeler cars, then you have heavy transportation. So each one of them has then the lower segment, mid segment, and the higher segment. So each will require its own, it will drive its own requirements. Yeah.
Interesting. And so Sanjay, I think there's been, if you want to talk about a buzzword, shared mobility, fleet vehicles, and e-vehicles is super hot right now. There's probably a panel every day on it. Maybe just talk about why people are so excited about that and why it makes sense.
Okay, so let me split this into two things, right? One is shared mobility and why that shared mobility should be electric. India is a very, what I call dil mange more country, which is, very, very price and costs. And transportation as a percentage of a normal average person's wallet is a very large double-digit number, right? And as cities increase in size and the sprawl increases, people need to travel more. And therefore, shared mobility offers a mechanism for people to travel cost effectively. Bombay is a great example. About 5 to 7% of people in Bombay own any form of mechanized transport. So that gives you an idea of what is the headroom available across all cities to use shared mobility. And shared mobility is not like in the US, but this is, I would say, anything where multiple people use the same asset over the course of a day, right? So it could be bus, it could be three-wheelers, it could be taxis, it could be mass transit. Why should those be electric? Really, the adoption of electric EVs in India will be determined by the price curve. EVs are more expensive from a capital perspective, but their operating costs are lower. Therefore, from a return on investment perspective, you got to put more people using it and doing more electric kilometers, and that's only possible in a commercial fleet. So if the break even today is about 200 kilometers per vehicle, that can't be done by a personal asset. It has to be done by a commercial asset. Also, how can you have 2 or 3 people or an occupancy of 2 or 3 per ride so that the cost per individual is lower, you know? So, and that is comparable to a IC engine vehicle that has been running for 5 years. So I think all of that put together, it makes the most sense for adoption of EVs in commercial fleets, whether they are three-wheelers, four-wheelers, municipal buses, and that's the reason why, you know, because you can do that many more electric miles in each of those vehicles, right?
Thank you for that. I think that set the ground. So we're entering the lightning round here where we're going to ask some just quick yes/no type of answers. So I'm just going to start off with Ashok and Sanjay on the question of what stick do you think the government should offer to facilitate?
So repeat the question.
What stick? Like, I suppose we have carrots and sticks, so what can you hit somebody over the head with to facilitate electric vehicle adoption in India?
Stick, carrot, and stick. So what kind of push government should provide?
Well, government can give incentives. Sticks will come in public vehicles. For example, in three-wheelers and buses, we can put restrictions saying that we would like to move to electric vehicle by such and such date. And if you don't, we will not give you fresh license. For private, we will not like to do that. Private vehicles, we will refrain from doing that. We may put saying that your emission can much be lower and lower and lower. But I don't think that we will sort of say by this date we are going to, you cannot have that. But let me tell you, there is another constituency out here, not the government, the judiciary. But judiciary can possibly put the stick and saying after this date in city of Delhi, no new ICE engine vehicle can be sold. That can happen, and that's likely to happen. Just like they did for BS4 vehicles.
Yeah, I think the last word, you know, just in terms of penalty, the ultimate penalty is one parity between Indian emission standards and global emission standards, and just raising the bar and pulling it forward in time. I think EVs is a great way to future-proof, right? And that's the only way, right? As of now. So just doing that. I mean, just say that by 2025, everything has to be Euro 6, irrespective of the vehicle class, and that's it. You know, either change or perish. That's about it, right?
So how about for Sanjeev? When do you think lithium battery costs will cross the lead acid price here in India?
Well, I think it depends how you look at cost. If you look at the life cycle cost of lithium-ion battery, they're already cheaper today. So I think if you want to decide on that basis, it's already that parity is available.
Okay, good answer. And how about this one for, let's see who we should go to. Naveen, I haven't called on you. Source of power in 2030. Will the majority of the power that powers electric vehicles come from renewables or from non-renewable sources? What's your guess?
I think it's going to be clean energy. It may be renewables, it could be nuclear, it could be hydro, so it could be any of these. But I think we will move away from thermal, as India is a thermal-dependent country at this point of time. By 2030, our estimation is definitely we're going to be moving away from thermals.
Starting with you, Sanjay, because you're next to me, and you've been nice to me. How do you see we talked a little bit about subsidies earlier, but how do you see the opportunities around R&D incentives here in India? Because in the US, certainly in China and the US as well, there's been a lot of incentives specifically to the electric vehicle supply chain. What type of R&D incentives do you think should be augmented or added to here?
I think there are two aspects to this. One is when you say incentives, you're saying what the government can do or should do.
Yeah.
And two is the reward that the market gives for a company to actually invest, right? So I think there are two elements to this. I would look at, and I was just talking to the professor earlier today and said, this is a very nascent industry. It's similar to what happened during the rise of the semiconductor industry. So take lessons from someone like what was done by Sematech when the government created that. So everything from academia, what's the kind of courses you need to have, what's the kind of skill building you need to have. So, and it's going to be a common resource pool and a common set of IP and how people are going to be using that. It's going to be a terrible waste of resources if everyone kind of reinvents the wheel on this one. And that's what Sematech did. That's one. Two, the capital markets have to reward capital allocation strategies of companies. So who's investing in this, which auto company is doing, which is not, is crucial to drive behavior at the leadership level at the corporates, right? So I think both of them are essential. Giving incentives is one, but actually, betting, enforcing that bet is very, very essential.
I'm looking at Sanjeev that he might jump in, but I don't think he is. Are you jumping in? Would you like to, did you have anything to add?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
It's fine. I thought you were looking at me because I was going to call on you next to ask you about the charging station opportunity in India. It's such a large opportunity here for you. And, how do you think about that given all the different pulls and pushes between government, private, that's been happening? Maybe talk a little bit about how ABB is looking at the opportunity.
I think the pushes and pulls are very positive in my opinion. I think one thing the government has done, which I believe they should have done on many things, many years for different areas of the economy. I think what they have done is they have said 2030 they want to convert to EV. So I think the moment you have that kind of declaration, all the technological as well as commercial forces start working in that direction. So I think that's a very good starting point. Now, when it comes to charging stations, yes, it will be an infrastructure. Infrastructure will be provided by different companies, just like Sanjay's company, which runs the fleet of vehicles. So it also provides the charging infrastructure for the corporates, and they own it. Then you will also have, as the density of the EV chargers increases, you will have the airport parking lots, you will have the shopping malls, you will have a different office building. They will equip themselves. And we do believe that there will be different companies which will emerge in future. One could be the power distribution company. They will own this infrastructure. And today, this morning, if you see, there is an article from Niti Aayog wherein they want to change the Electricity Act, wherein today the power is owned by the distribution company. Tomorrow, they can allow the private companies who want to set up the charging stations, they can own the power and sell it. So I think once you have these kind of policy tweaking taking place, you'll have a host of companies which will come up, just like they run the parking lots today, they will run the parking lots together with the chargers tomorrow.
I didn't know about that this morning, so thanks for that hot off the presses. Ashok, how does one decide what government should push forward and own and direct, and how do you mix that with directing the private sector? How do you guys think about that?
Basically, we clearly see that it is the private organizations which will deliver. We are very clear on that. And we are just kind of guiding them. We are actually driving R&D, driving development in a manner things become viable and feasible. As we pointed out, that subsidy is not an option for India. And therefore, everything has to become viable. And we are looking, therefore, and one of the reasons why the government has involved people like me from R&D, is to try to understand what is likely to happen to each component. For example, batteries, what is likely to happen? Motors, how do you make your vehicles efficient? Because if you make your vehicles efficient, your battery size goes down and your cost goes down. So how do you really win in a situation where China, United States, Europe has already moving very rapidly? How do we win? This is the key thing that we are actually driving. A lot of our programs, a lot of our initiative, occasionally we can play a role of buyer. Occasionally we can play a role of just enabling somebody else to buy. Sometimes we influence, sometimes we provide R&D funds, sometimes we actually provide some prototyping and some funds for example, recently through FAME, we have come up with programs for multiple cities. Cities can bid and get a certain amount of money, and they can set up the complete infrastructure, and we are trying to do that. But for every single thing, we have to look at economic viability. And that comes only when we work with industry. So we work with industry in getting these things done.
So Naveen, I think one of the things that I've found interesting here in India was the big push by the government to tax at a much higher rate than I would have expected the hybrid vehicles versus electric vehicles. But that's a very strong signal. And I'm just interested, as somebody who's working in, obviously you have an electric vehicle, so it's beneficial to you. Did that surprise you, or did that seem to make sense that the government would push so far towards the tax benefit?
See, there has to be a transition. I mean, electric is an answer. So governments, the way we understand from the government and talking to the government from the association point of view, that their focus is the two-wheelers, the three-wheelers, and the public transport. They are not so concerned about the cars at this point, the four-wheelers at this point of time. So they would rather give a push there. The second is they want to see a maximum amount of power-to-wheel ratio that they can possibly derive. And if you look at the NEMMP report, which was done a number of years back, and that was done by a number of consultants, that the maximum power-to-wheel ratio is derived out of two-wheelers rather than four-wheelers. Also because in a four-wheeler, you've got one or two people sitting, plus the occupancy of the road space, etc. So the government's push, and which is fine, is more towards electrification. And luckily, we are able to leapfrog technology since we are starting so late in the whole electric market. So I think what's going to happen is the government's push towards electric is going to continue, and they're not going to focus so much on hybrids. The hybrids, again, there's a huge amount of dilution of hybrids that happen. Is it a plug-in hybrid? Is it a mild hybrid? Is it a PEV? What kind of hybrid is it? And that sometimes gets misused. So I think we have banged with the government to say that electric is the answer.
That's the way to go. Okay. So, Sanjay, I think you've already talked a little bit about the role of the aggregator, shared mobility, electric vehicle space, but maybe you could just talk about what do you think if you and Ola got together and others that could actually accelerate the speed with which all the vision around electric vehicles are happening today in India? Is there things that you think would speed up this whole process for everyone that you could help with?
I think two, three things. One is today, transport is actually a state subject. That means every state decides its policy on its own, and there's no uniformity in that, right? So can there be a uniform mechanism to do this? Two, electric vehicle adoption, yes, at least for the foreseeable future, the vehicles will be more expensive than what they ought to be. Is there a way in which, therefore, for example, if you want to lease the battery and your capex cost comes down, but the GST on leased batteries is 28%, while on the electric vehicle is 12%. So can that be rationalized? Is there a way in which, and Professor has done a lot of work on standardizing charging protocols, etc. That means you don't put up stuff, different cars don't talk differently, because we will have a hybridized fleet at some point in time. Fourth thing is, which is very important, is an IC engine vehicle is very liquid. So if I'm a driver and I buy an IC engine vehicle, if I have a cash call in my life, I can sell it because that's very liquid. Electric vehicle, the price discovery of a second-hand electric vehicle is still a big mystery, right? So creating a market for that, and second life of batteries, right? So I think if those things are helped, and if you look at financing of a car, in yesterday's panel, everyone spoke about battery as a storage mechanism, etc. If you look at mobility as an extension of infrastructure, can you now finance an electric vehicle very differently as compared to an IC engine vehicle? So can the tenor of that loan be 5 or 7 or 8 years rather than 3 years, as it is for a regular commercial vehicle? I think all of that will help move this forward together.
So, Sanjeev, I'm asking you to predict the future now. So if you're going to look 5, 6, 7 years out, can you maybe give your own thoughts on a breakdown of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler purchasers? How big is the market? Who's buying what? What's popular?
I think one has to recognize that India doesn't live only in the urban centers. Much of India lives in semi-urban and the rural areas. So you will have a good mix of solutions. I think two-wheelers, three-wheelers, they will find their space in the personal as well as in the public space. But at the same time, I do see that as the grid is growing to generate a lot of renewable power, we have to have the consumption points also, which are clean based. So I believe there will be good movement in the four-wheeler cars, and then I believe very soon, in 4, 5, 6 years period of time, we'll definitely have at least for the urban centers, the transport vehicles, the buses, and even the pickup trucks, etc., which will go electric. Yeah.
Does anyone else have another view on the panel?
I'd like to just add a couple of things on various things. One of the comments that you made was, what is going to be our energy mix? We are committed to have an energy mix where renewables become the dominant. And it is going to continue to do that. Number two, I want to point out that unless we drive innovation and come out with different ways, for example, battery swapping is a very important thing that we want to drive, because we want to see what does battery swapping gives us, because that eliminates the role of chargers on the streets. And can we actually use battery swapping instead of doing fast charging? One of the big problems with fast charging is at high temperature, like 40, 45 degrees centigrade, it has a very adverse impact on the battery. And this is something India's problem. It is not a problem of Europe or much of United States or China, and therefore we have to worry about it. Second, we would like to use the lowest cost batteries. Now, if you do fast charging, you may have an adverse impact on the battery life. So if you use expensive battery, the impact is much less. So we have to do the right mix. There is certainly going to be a place for each of these things, and that is what is going to happen. Finally, I also want to say, we would like to see that for all subsystem of electric vehicle, the GST rate is brought down to 5%. And so that we'd like to see
Did I
that
hear that
happens.
right? 5%?
And this is likely to happen for the battery, including battery leasing. But we may have to distinguish between the electric vehicle battery and the rest of the battery. We are coming out with a concept called LS battery, locked smart batteries. These are the batteries which cannot be charged by any charger except the authorized charger, by some encrypted token passing, and cannot be discharged on a vehicle except the authorized vehicle. That will enable us to move towards a 5% GST.
So that sounds great, and now you just got 7% off, and everything's working for you, Sanjay. So
I have only one more request,
Yeah.
really. I think one is,
Keep going.
can I make 5 into 0? No. But I think really the issue is, both from a personal mobility perspective, it's a question of choice. And to improve choice and, make in India is a goal, but you have companies like whether it's Mercedes, Renault, Nissan, XYZ, who have kind of proven and invested billions in India. They have these EVs outside of India. So in the short term, can the government look at getting their vehicles in India, right? That means a fixed time, fixed quantity, kind of an import duty waiver in which the cars are taxed at GST rate, so the government really doesn't lose out on its revenue. But then that provides an impetus for even personal buyers, because there is no personal buyer who today drives a Toyota Camry who's going to shift to driving a Mahindra electric car, right? And also, it's all about area under the curve. So even if the price of the car is higher, but if the car now lasts for 300,000 kilometers, and the benefit of having, the difference. So for the audience, let me just say, a typical hatchback in India, the fuel cost is about 5 rupees a kilometer. At the renewable prices that we all heard yesterday, it will be between 40 paisa, 45 paise per kilometer, right? And therefore, the difference is massive. It's a 9x differential, right? So if that 9x differential can be juiced out over, 300,000 kilometers, that's a lot of money. So it's not a question of just, is it a 25 lakh rupee car, right? But if then it's a financing problem. Can you finance the 25 lakh rupee car over a 7-8 year period while you're earning on that? It's a question of, like Professor said, if it's a better battery and the battery lasts 300,000 kilometers, it's a financing problem. It's not a technical problem. So can we get some of those things here? And over a period of time, transition that into Make in India as the volumes pick up and stuff like that. So I think that'll be a very, very important thing to introduce that here.
So Naveen, just, I mean, my background is I've done a couple of battery-related investments, and there's very few successful battery investors in the world. I'll just note that. But the one thing I do know around electric vehicles is a lot of them view that as kind of part of their engine or their sweet spot. So when you hear different discussions around swappable or standardizations, how does that make you feel? Because you're kind of the manufacturer here. And what are the things that come to mind as pros and cons in that environment?
I will talk about a couple of things. Is for mass adoption of vehicles. The only way it's going to happen, see at this point of time, the performance of a battery as compared to that of a combustion engine, like to like, is not comparable. Battery will not perform the same as a liter of fuel. Not a liter of fuel, but fuel per se, petrol or diesel, whatever it may be. The cost, if you have to get that level of performance, the cost of the battery and the technology goes up drastically higher. So there is multiple ways by countries have adopted it. If you look at China, which is about 90% of the electric vehicle market globally, it's about 250 times that of India in terms of the cars, and many thousands of times higher than India in terms of the two-wheeler adoption. It was done by two ways. One was the carrot and stick approach, so which means completely ban combustion engine vehicles from coming into polluting cities. Second, you incentivize the front end, front load the purchase of electric vehicles to people because the battery is more expensive technology. And third, you create an infrastructure which is there for people to come and charge. Now, whether it is swapping and charging, both of them have to coexist. Fleet sales are going to require a swapping station. Consumer sales, it's going to be difficult for them to use the charging station, the swapping model, simply because everybody will have to have the same modular structure to be able to take those batteries, and they can't charge them at home. So there are ideas around it, how that can be worked out. But what we require, and India being a large two-wheeler and a smaller vehicle market, what you require is not very high capacity charging stations. You need very basic charging infrastructure, which is not going to cost much, but you need it to be in abundance. In a place like Delhi, if you have 10 or 50 or 100 charging stations, it's going to do nothing for the city. You have to have 10,000 in Delhi. That's the only way that you're going to get the mass adoption of vehicles to happen. In which case, then people don't need very large batteries in their vehicle, which brings the cost down. So if they're going to a coffee shop, if they're going to a mall, or if they're going to their office, they know that there is a charging spot there where they can plug in the vehicle. Or if they have to go beyond something, and if it's a fleet sale, all these e-commerce. Another thing that we are talking to the government about is to say that all these e-commerce delivery vehicles, why are they old motorcycles and scooters? Why is a part of that not electric? Because you don't need speed there. You don't need that range. And there, a swapping model will absolutely work. Three-wheelers, swapping will absolutely work, and that's what it should be. But for consumer vehicles, you need, because people will not go out of the way to go and charge or swap a battery somewhere. That defeats the purpose. It's almost like going to a gas station to fill your fuel. And that's where so if you have to go into mass adoption, we need a series of things. Just one thing, one is not an answer. So we need a series of things to happen, and these are not very expensive things.
So I have a lot of nodding heads here. I get Sanjay first, and then Sanjeev.
Yeah, I think the adoption of EVs is really based on viability, right? What works for you in terms of economically. And I think, like in any other market, the viability is not like an electric switch that in one day all segments become viable, right? So it is going to be segment by segment based on the maturity of the technology and the availability of infrastructure, et cetera, that will become viable. And, I think, so for example, even for Naveen's business, there might be a commercial segment that has certain things, or for example, there could be a performance on the personal mobility side. I think Musk got it right because he looked at vanity rather than sanity, and he sold that, right? But the commercial buyers are much more rational, and therefore, I think, that part, there are those different segments which will become viable, and that may not need a, large infrastructure to begin with to kind of spur that adoption. Right?
So Sanjeev, I mean, is that how you kind of look at the world as ABB? There's kind of this personal choice and a commercial choice? And
Yeah, I think when India is making choices like we had done in past, I think we should keep one more, that we must be doing something in new, which is solving a problem. And while we're solving a problem, we should adapt the global standards and at the same time contribute to the global standard. I think when you have this kind of an attitude and this kind of a behavior, not to isolate ourselves, I think that's not a good strategy. But in order to adapt as well as contribute, I think then you participate in the global ecosystem, and then it's much more sustainable over a period of time.
So I'm going to just turn to Ashok just for a moment. You know, you've got, you've mentioned this more than once, and there's even reports I've read about India's desire to try to own the battery. And if you can get more than just the battery pack here, you capture so much more part of the GDP comment you meant earlier, which is really important. You said 12% of your GDP is connected to ICE engines and gas, and now all of a sudden, if you start buying everything overseas, there's a swing there. Given the overcapacity already in lithium battery globally, and the outputs coming out of your nearby near neighbors in China, how do you think you can go from just being a battery pack play to really bringing the chemistry in by 2030? And I think every country has this. Outside of China, if it's you're in US, Europe, they're all asking the same question. So how can you make that a reality?
Well, we did a just quick calculation, and India alone may consume something close to 30 gigawatt of hour of battery in next 4 or 5 years' time. And year after year, it's going to continue to grow. So today, whatever battery capacity exists is before the electric vehicles have really taken off. And as the electric vehicles taken off, the battery capacity is certainly not enough. It is going to go up by 10 times, probably 20 times. I see India having 100 gigawatt or more, watt hour or more battery plants by 2030 or so. I want to point out the following. I think we have a three-wheeler strategy by and large worked out. City buses we have by and large worked out. We think we will be able to launch it over the next 1 year. Taxis and government vehicles, we have already made a beginning, four-wheelers. What we really need to do is four-wheeler and personal segments, two-wheeler in personal segments, and within cities, various goods carrying traffic. I think we will pretty much do much of these things worked out over next 1 year, such that private vehicles can, private sector can then just go up and move things fast. On battery, as I pointed out, we have looked at the materials, we have looked at the cell manufacturing, and our largest manufacturers like Exide and Amar Raja are geared up to make batteries in India. So that part also we have done. Chargers, we have made a good beginning. We have got things going, and we will move towards international standards. But the only issue is that it will be the standards which are more suitable to India's requirement rather than just blindly adopting something like that. That's our strategy, and that's what we plan to do.
So now would be a good time to open it up to the audience. We have the first hand wins in the middle. And there's a second hand in the back. You won. There we go. Nope, we have a polite person. Sorry, I'm going to let the gentleman in the front go first, and then you can go second, please.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Bhartendu Sinha from AutoGrid. My question is for Professor Jhunjhunwala, because we have interacted in the past in previous roles. We've seen a lot of leadership technologies in India come and then gradually fade away, right? Whether C-Dot for telecom or initially mobile handsets, TVs. We had a lot of domestic brands. And as you say, electric vehicles will happen in India. They will become a reality. But how do we know we won't just become another export market for countries that have invested more in taking their research to production with government facilitated programs? Because the way I see it, we are focused on the vehicles. There's not much happening in terms of fundamental research. It's not just this segment. It's a countrywide problem in all segments. So as a technologist and as a person who's taken several research products to market, what do you see is needed to make India a research and production hub for these technologies rather than a market where just electric vehicles are deployed with imported components?
Wow, he gave you a home run there.
Yeah, we are very clear that we don't want that to happen. So we are, however, partnering with our auto manufacturing company. whether it is for four-wheeler, three-wheeler, two-wheelers, or buses, are fairly strong. Whether some of, many of them are Indian, some of them may be multinational, but they are now manufactured in India. We believe that they are going to manufacture in India first. I'll come to the subsystems and components later. We will ensure that these kind of companies like Hero, companies like TVS Motors, companies like Tata's or Maruti and Hyundai, or Eicher and Ashok Leyland or Tata Motors, all actually manufacture electric vehicles. We have to ensure that. New ones can also come in, but these we want to ensure that. Now, there is a part of things like body and other parts, many other parts, tires, many of these things will continue from the IC engine. What is going to change? The change is going to be motors and drives. That is the one major change. And we are fairly clear that we need a fairly strong R&D focus on motors and drives. Number two, we all kinds of power electronics and DC-DC converters. These are also something that we are fairly focused. On battery, battery materials, as I pointed out, the cells and battery packs, these will have to be made in India. And finally, I think the battery chargers. So the change element is what we are trying to focus and bring that in India. There will be other things like electric power brakes instead of hydraulic power brakes, electric steering, electrically driven steering rather than hydraulically driven steering. Many of these things we have barely begun. Remember that we started this whole work in about 6 to 8 months back. But I think that's where the auto industry, the autos component industry actually has to work with us, with Indian R&D, to try to win and not let the Chinese or some other people to just flood us. So that is, we are clear, we want to do that, we will help every component manufacturer. That's the direction that we will do. And R&D will also do the same.
Sanjay, did you just want to
I think it's a great comment. I think self-reliance and developing technology locally, it definitely kicks up the value chain in the country. And I think that at this point of time, it's lacking. We don't have a very matured value chain in the country for the electric vehicles to scale up as we plan to scale up. So I think this is a case which needs to be accelerated. And one thing I learned having worked in different countries, especially China, if we take that as an example, I think one thing that they do better than us is that any new initiative they want to launch, they have a design institute formulated. And this is the design institute which formulates as well as holds the technology together and continues to incrementally develop in, and also works with the component suppliers, and also work with the vehicle or anybody who is participating in that particular vertical, and they sustain it over a period of time. I think in India we also have very good examples. If you see in a different domain, NTPC, for example, they produce about 52 gigawatt of power today. It's a very fine institute developed over a period of time, which kept those technologies as well as practices together. Power Grid Corporation, which develops the transmission grids across the country, it's an institute which really knows those technology deep-ended. And I believe if we want to accelerate this area, of course, already we have a good start that the professor is involved with this mindset, but I think we should institutionalize it and really make a very strong design institute inside the country, which accelerates and holds these elements together.
Thank you. The gentleman in the back, if you could just announce yourself.
I am Vaibhav. I am from World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And I had a question. Will India be able to achieve 100% EV through Indian manufacturing alone? And if not, at what rate will the overseas EVs be allowed in India?
So maybe we'll give the air to Sanjay and Naveen for that answer.
See, there is already, the import duties have already been there for vehicles being imported from outside. So what is going to happen is, as there's a pull that happens in the market, as the market begins to expand, more and more manufacturing will happen in India, simply because it's going to be unviable for you to keep on importing the vehicles. Unless they're in a very high speed, high spec. If you look at India, the mass of in the logistics, in the transportation sector, whether it's two-wheelers or four-wheelers, is all manufactured in India now, simply because it's not viable for these companies to continue importing. As the government introduced high import duties on vehicles, the same thing is going to happen with electric vehicles as well. at this point, the infrastructure for manufacturing batteries, the motors, the controllers, etc. in India is very, very nascent. It's not there. Whereas if you look at the countries where these technologies are coming in from, these countries have been there in this market for the past 10, 12, 15 years. We've been in the market for 10 years, but we didn't have anybody here who could supply us the components that we wanted. So we had no option but to import those. But we've already started graduating towards localization, which we've been doing for many years. So you're talking in the next 5 to 7 years, a large part of the vehicle will be manufactured in India. That said, we also need companies to start making investments. It's a chicken and egg story. A lot of companies are waiting for the egg to hatch before they will make anything. But the fact is that unless you really nurture that egg, that chicken's not going to hatch. So which means you've got to start putting the infrastructure, the investments in place, start doing the R&D, and then the market will take off. The government can only say that, this is the direction we want to go to. This is where we want to be in 10 years' time. Now, the path to that is recommended this, but there could be some deviations along the way. So companies will have to come in, start making investments into R&D, start making investments into localization of everything, charging infrastructure, batteries, the mechanicals, the drivetrains, everything. And then the industry will fall into place. I hope that answers what you.
Yeah, I think I agree with Naveen. I think there's only that much that a policy can do in terms of this is what it should be, but ultimately it's a question of practice, whether you are able to develop the best motor or the most cost-effective motor, the most cost-effective controller. If you're not, there is no other alternative to that. For, say, if a supplier is not able to provide the best kind of spec to what Naveen's vehicles want, then there is no alternative for him but to go and, import it, because that's what his end customer expects from the vehicle that he wants. So a lot of it is, yes, directionally, it is a good thing to have, but, there is so much that, and it should be a level playing field. What kind of a vehicle is you as consumers are willing to buy, and therefore can the market or Indian manufacturers can produce that, right, while live with a substandard product.
Sanjeev?
Yeah, I think one thing we should also differentiate what is local and what is outside. Like say, my company ABB is a multinational, but manufacturing in this country for last 60 years. And we have 47 factories, and we practically manufacture everything locally, localized, what is available with ABB globally. So now what happens is one advantage of staying with the global standards and also inviting global standards is that the companies like us, we channelize those global standards and localize them locally. So I think the choices needs to be made. And when the good choices are made, I think we should not be shy of bringing the best of technology in the beginning and then make sure that, we accelerate the localization of it. I think that's one faster way of scaling up the industry as we want to do it in the country.
I think we have time for one last question, and there's someone standing with a microphone. There you go. That was a good result.
Hello. Namaste, good morning, everybody. And my name is Devesh. I'm from Seva organization. But within Seva, we have this technology branch, and I'm leading that team. My question is from two perspectives. One is the battery, the other one is vehicle. For example, in some of the rural schools, we have helped them solarize their schools, giving them battery. But once these summer vacations set in, the batteries all go for a toss. And year on year, they are having a lot of problems. So I have a very focused or a narrow question in the sense that, is there any battery or a technology available? Well, this question is for everybody. Then I would want people to connect back with me, or even if you can, the panel can tell me that, is there any technology from lithium batteries that, which we can utilize? Yeah, then I'm open for that.
Meet us after the panel. Meet me after the panel. I'll help you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the second one was with respect to these electric vehicle. Lot of women in urban area, they are head loaders basically. And we have had challenges with respect to choosing the right vehicle, because we don't want, these poor women, when they buy things on a loan, they cannot afford to go for, repair work and all those things. So is any of you involved in those kind of vehicle which can be taken through narrow streets and that can alleviate problem of these women.
Yeah. Naveen, you want to jump on that one?
So two-wheelers, you're talking about two-wheelers here? Or it doesn't
Right now,
matter?
three-wheelers is what we are thinking. These women, they say that electric rickshaw.
So you're looking
but
for-
I have seen what is in Delhi, electric rickshaw kind of things that they are going. But when I spoke with few of those drivers themselves, they are telling that nahi sahab ye problem aata hai, wo problem. You know, they come up with their own laundry list of issues. So I am little bit skeptic of burning my fingers in that
What I
area.
suggest is that you communicate with us, we'll help you.
Okay.
Say we'll certainly help Seva.
So there
We
is-
have solutions.
There are solutions available for what you're looking for.
Okay.
In Delhi, the guys that you've spoken to, unfortunately, what's happened is that because of this huge amount of influx of low-cost, poor-quality Chinese products which came in, and the market, the prices dropping, that's where the problem happened. But there are enough manufacturers and beyond who will help you with introducing vehicles for the rural markets, which can be charged from the grid easily or from solar, if you've got solar this thing.
Yes.
And
we
there are
have-
solutions around it. So let's talk after this. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
There is one last.
For getting the thumbs down from my organizer. So I'm going to do some quick wrap up for everyone. We really appreciate your time. For the IFC, if a few of the people who work in climate and/or financial institutions group, if you could just raise your hand, a few of you, be bold. There we go. There's a couple of names. These are the people who are working with the large financial institutions here in India to try to help bring financial solutions for things like leasing a battery or an electric vehicle over time as this market develops. So those are the people you should go after who raise their hands if you're interested in finding out what the IFC is doing. Separately, Subranil, are you around? Where are you? There we are. Stand up, because you're only one. This way you'll really get noticed. He's been working with the EcoCities team with a couple of the local cities here in India and doing great work about how they can adopt electric vehicle solutions. So if you're interested in learning more about that, he's a great guy to talk to on that front. And I'll just say that I really enjoyed, I've been talking to the panelists over the past month. I got a lot of research from the Indian local teams on transport and EcoCities, and it's just been fascinating to see that the Indian government is really pushing hard. That the comment about the electric vehicle tax rate, that blew me away, that they would have such a differential. To see that, I mean, I'd like to see that in my own country. And so just knowing that there's all that energy behind it, and now really with that ambition, how do you build the capacity? And both what we've heard today is how are we financing this? How are we doing R&D? You know, what do we have here internally, and we don't want to import everything. So I'm very excited. I have to admit I'm a believer more in the 2030 story, having been part of this panel now. As an overseas person, when that came out initially, I think it was like, I think New York City suggested that like 10 years ago, and I thought that's not going to happen in New York either. So this was great to be part of, and thank you all for dedicating so much of your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.